Now going forward, let's talk about the stature. What do you mean by stature? Stature means height of the person, right? Height of the person, right? Basically, when you are estimating the height of the person, the stature of the person, right? The long bones, most important. The most reliable bones are the long bones. Out of which bone is the best? Femur is the best, right? When we discussed about race determination, I told you skull is the best. When we discussed about sex determination, I told you this pelvis is best. Now this one, the stature, the femur is the best. The femur is the best. Okay, so this important point that you have to remember. Now let us say how to estimate the stature of the person from the long bone. What you have to do is, first you need to calculate the length of the bone. We need to calculate the length of the bone. How will you measure the length of the bone? You can use what is called as Hepburn's osteometric bone. Hepburn's osteometric bone. This is osteometric bone. Osteo means bone. Metric means measurement. When you measure the bone, that is osteometric bone. There is no confusion in that. So this is osteometric bone. Osteometric bone, basically you will have a platform which is calibrated, right? One end you will have this is fixed. Another side you will have which is movable, right? So this will be movable. You need to keep the bone. You need to, let us say this is the bone, right? You need to move it. When you move it, you can find out what is the measurement of the bone. Based on that, you can find out the length of the bone. Once it is measured, from that bone length, you will start finding out what is the stature of the person. What are the different ways by which you can find out the stature of the person from the length of the bone, right? Number one, the first one is called regression formulae. Regression formulae. Regression equation or regression formulae, right? Another method is multiplication factor. Multiplication factor is another way by which we can find out the stature of the person, right? The third one is your percentile formula. Percentile formula, that is also being used. So we'll discuss one by one, right? Regression formula, you have so many things are there. Trotter, Glesser, Carl-Person, Trotter, Glesser, Duputrus and Hader. Trotter and Glesser. So just know the name of it. It is not so important, right? So all these equations are there which will help us to find out the length, stature of the person from the length of the bone. But what is so important is we need to look at the multiplication factor from examination point of view. They can ask you multiplication factor. What is that multiplication factor? For every bone, you will have a number, multiplication number. If you multiply it with that number, you will find out the height of the person. That's called multiplication factor. We'll discuss about that, right? Multiplication factor, I told you that it will differ from bone to bone. Multiplication factor. Here we'll be discussing on the long bones. Let's talk about long bones, right? We'll talk about long bones. The best bone, long bone, femur. Let's say femur, right? So this femur, the multiplication factor is 3.7, right? You just have to remember only one number, that is 3.7. Once you know this number, the next to femur, the next longest bone, that is tibia, you need to add it by 0.8, right? You need to add it by 0.8. 3.7 plus 0.8, that will be 4.5, right? That will be 4.5. After tibia, the next bone is humerus, wherein you again add it 4.5 plus 0.8, you will get around 5.3, right? 5.3. Then again, the next bone that you have is ulna, right? Ulna, you again you need to add a 0.8 to 5.3. In that case, you will get 6.1. Now the last bone, that is radius. See, radius and ulna both are very, very similar. So you don't have to add 0.8. You just need to add 0.4. That is sufficient. In that case, you will get 6.5. So these are all the multiplication factor. What you have learnt, you just have to remember only one number, that is your femur. After femur, tibia. After tibia, you have humerus, then ulna, finally radius. Everything you need to add 0.8. For ulna and radius alone, you need to add 0.4. From ulna into radius, you need to add only 0.4. That is sufficient, right? Fine. So that is again very important. How to remember this sequence? You can remember feather, right? You can remember feather, right? Some students might ask, sir, this is not the correct spelling of feather, right? I will tell them that you need the spelling to be corrected, or you want the MCQ to be answered correctly in your examination. So remember, so this is feather, right? Femur, tibia, humerus, ulna and radius, right? So with that you can answer that MCQ correctly. And what number that you need to remember? Two numbers that you have to remember, 3.7 and 0.8. Done? Then, so this is again, though we remember this number and multiplication factor, right? It is a little more complex, that it's more of factual. It's more of factual. How to make it even more simpler, wherein you can use this percentile formula that will help us to answer even more easier. How? Because every bone will be contributing certain percentage of the height of the person. Say for example, if it is femur, the entire length of femur will be corresponding to 27% of the total height of the person, total stature of the person, right? If the person's stature is 100 centimeter, height is 100 centimeter, out of the 100 centimeter, 27% is given only by femur. 27% is given only by femur, right? Then after which we have tibia. Tibia contributes 22% of the entire stature of the person, and humerus length contributes around 20% of the entire stature of the person. And if you know the height of the spine, if you know the entire length of the spine, that will contribute 35% of the height of the person. Okay, so now it becomes little more simple. What you have to remember? Femur 27%, humerus that is 20%, tibia 22%. So if they give you the femoral length is this many centimeters, what is the length of the, what is the entire height of the person, stature of the person? You can use this 27%, you can calculate, you can easily find out the stature of the person. You don't have to remember multiplication factor also. Okay, so that is what you need to remember with regard to the multiplication factor and the percentile formula, right? I was talking about the methods of stature estimation from intact bone, right? If the bone is completely intact, if the whole bone is available, you can find out from this. In case if there is mutilated bodies, if there is mass disaster, if there is bomb explosion wherein you don't get a complete bone, you get only fragmented remains. In that case, what to do? If you are getting a fragmented bones, there are two important methods from which we can find out the height of the person. Just need to know the name of it, that is sufficient, guys. Number one, it is called Steele and Meckens, right? Steele and Meckens, called Steele and Meckens formula, or you can say Steele and Meckens method. And another important one, the latest one, is that is Bidmos method. Both have given formulae by which even from a fragment of the bone you can find out the entire stature of the person. Steele and Bidmos, right? So just to remember, all this is from fragmented bones. Okay, fine. So that is about the stature that we have to know. Okay, so far we were discussing about the methods to identify race, age, sex and stature, and they call it as Big Four. Now we'll be discussing about the methods for definitive identification of the person. Definitive means complete identity of the person. You can find out who is he, right? Whether the person is X or Y or Z, you can fix the identity of the person, complete identity of the person. In that sequence, the first important method is basically fingerprinting. What are basically fingerprints? Fingerprints are basically the impressions of the papillary ridges. On the skin. Not only on the skin, sometimes on any surface also. Right, on the skin or any surface. We call this as fingerprint. right? The technique of which fingerprints, studying fingerprints, called as dactylography. We call it as dactylography. We call it as dactyloscopy. We call it as dermatoglyphics, right? So many names are there. Dermatoglyphics, right? It is dactyloscopy, right? So though you have so many terms for the technique, doesn't matter, just know dermatoglyphics or dactylography, that is sufficient, right? If you talk about the history, the first person to identify this is William Herschel. He was the first person to identify this method, and then it was systematized by another person called Sir Francis Galton, right? Now we use one important classification method, that is called Henry Galton system. This is the system that we use now, Henry Galton system, right? So we are using this particular system of fingerprinting, Henry Galton system. And you know very well, the world's first fingerprint bureau was established in Kolkata. We know that, okay, world's first fingerprint bureau, right? And that's more of factual kind of questions. Like nowadays, you don't get that kind of factual questions. You get conceptual questions only, right? Fine. Henry Galton system. How much probable that one person is having same fingerprint, two people having the same fingerprint? If I'm having one fingerprint, what is the probability that another person will also having same fingerprint just like me? What is the probability? Remember, it is so unique that 1 in 64,000 billion will be having same fingerprint. It is so very unique, right? When does it develop? Fingerprints we discussed. When does it develop? Development. Remember, the development happens in the intrauterine life, in the fetal age itself. It's not after birth. It is in the intrauterine life. The appearance of the fingerprinting, it starts at 12th week to 16th week of intrauterine life. 12th week to 16th week, intrauterine life, right? It gets completed around 20 to 24 weeks of intrauterine life. 20 to 24th week of intrauterine life, right? Everything in weeks. And it is intrauterine life, right? Starting is 12 to 16. It is completed around 2024. How to remember it easily? I'll tell you very easy way to remember. You can remember 3, 4, 5, 6. Instead of weeks, you convert into month. 3 to 4 months, 5 to 6 months. Starting 3 to 4 months, completed around 5 to 6 months. That is a very easy way to remember. Okay, fine. Now going forward, we know how, when it is developed, right? Once it is developed, it is permanent. It doesn't change usually, right? It doesn't change, right? If you take a skin cut section, and you take a skin cut sections up to 0.6 millimeter, we can find the fingerprint, right? Up to 0.6 millimeter fingerprint will be there. We'll talk about the different types of fingerprint. What are the different types? The type of fingerprint we can classify based on the pattern, right? And based on availability in the scene of crime. SOC means scene of crime. First, I'll tell you about the scene of crime, then we'll come to the pattern. Scene of crime, you can see that in the scene of crime, number 1, right? It is called visible fingerprint. Visible, which is also called as patent fingerprint. Visible fingerprint, also called as patent fingerprint. The person touching a surface with a blood-stained finger, right? You can easily see that. That's a visible fingerprint. Number 2, it is latent fingerprint. It is invisible. You will not be able to see that, right? It is also called as chance fingerprint. It is not visible. You need to make it visible by applying some developmental process. You can throw some fingerprint powder, or you need to do some process to make it visible. That's called latent fingerprint, also called as chance fingerprint. That is basically the work of your fingerprint experts. The last one is plastic fingerprint, also called as indented fingerprint, where the person touches any molten surface, cheese or any wax, right? You touch a molten surface, it is imprinted on that area. The fingerprint is imprinted on that area. That's called plastic fingerprint, also called as indented fingerprint. The name itself explains everything. Visible, right? Latent or invisible. The last one is plastic or indented, right? I'll show you that. Have a look at it. This is your visible fingerprint where the person touching the surface with the blood-stained finger, you can clearly see the visible fingerprint. Okay, so this is the fingerprint, latent fingerprint, right? Can you see the fingerprint? Yes, it is normally not visible. You need to do the developmental process so that it will be made visible like this. So this is latent fingerprint, right? Chance fingerprint. Plastic fingerprint is where the molten surface indented. Fine. Now let us talk about the types based on the pattern of the fingerprint. Number one, you remember number one, that is loop pattern. Number two, it is whorls. The third one is arch. The last one is composite. So we have loop pattern, we have whorls pattern, arch pattern, and the last one is composite. I'll show you what it is. The loop pattern is the most common pattern. About 60 to 65% of the general population will be having loop. Right, this is loop. You can see the ridge, fingerprint ridge. It starts from one side, goes to the top, comes back to the same side. That is called loop. Right, you can see the ridge starts there, goes to the top, comes back to the same side. That is called loop. If it is the loop is towards the ulnar side, it is called ulnar loop. Suppose if the ridge starts from the radial side, comes back to the radius side, it's called radial loop. Okay, two types of the loop pattern. Fine. The next pattern is whorl pattern, wherein you can see concentric whorls. You can see concentric or spiral. Right, you can see this whorl pattern. Whorl pattern. Right, and the last one is, the third one is arch. You can see the ridge starts there and goes to the opposite side. Ridge starts there, goes to the opposite side. If it is just like this, it is plain arch. If it is going there and then goes on the opposite side, that is called tented arch. It can be a plain arch, it can also be a tented arch, doesn't matter. Just do remember arch, that's more than sufficient. Okay, that's more than sufficient. I told you loop, I told you whorls, I told you arch. The last one is composite. Composite is something where you have a mixture of 2-3 patterns. Fine. I told you the most common pattern is loop pattern, second most common is whorl, the third most common is arch, and the last one is composite. Do remember the last one is composite. It has to go from top to bottom. Do remember, you need to roll the order. The first one is loop, second one is whorls, third one is arch, and the last one is composite. How can you remember? You can remember by remembering Lucy. What is it, Lucy? Lucy works at cafe. Right? Lucy works at cafe, loop, whorls, arch, and composite. You can remember this. Right? So this is the basic information that you have to remember. When you go to the next level, extra edge topic, there are two important points that you have to know. Number one is core. Number two is delta. Core and delta. What is core? Core is the place where the ridge recurs. You can see it is recurring. It recurs. Delta is a converging point of 3 ridges. Right? You can see the converging point of 3 ridges. Right? That is delta. Right? Converging point of 3 ridges, that is called delta. Core and delta. Fine? Core and delta. Now I can show you this one. Fine? First pattern is loop pattern, I told you. In the loop pattern, you can see that, you can see this is delta and this is core. Fine? Similarly, look at the whorl pattern. In the whorl pattern, you can see 1 core in the center and 2 delta on either sides. Plain arch will not be having anything, no core, no delta. Sometimes tented arch may be having only 1 core. Right? Now, if you want me to summarize the same information, I'll summarize it. You see here, you write the patterns, arch, loop, and whorls. You see here, I've written down in the alphabetical order. Arch, loop, and whorls. This is core and this is delta. Arch, 0, 0. No core, no delta. Loop pattern, you will have 1 core and 1 delta. 1 and 1. Right? 1 and 1. And then comes the whorls, you will have 1 core and 2 delta. 0, 0, 1, 1, 1 and 2. Right? So do remember, that's what I told you here. Whorls will be having 1 core and 2 delta. Loop will be having 1 core and 1 delta. That's what I've told you. Okay? So this is an extra edge topic. Do remember this. Fine? Now going forward, let's talk about lifting the fingerprint. When I tell you that lifting the fingerprint, don't think that I'm going to discuss about the different mechanism by which you are going to lift the fingerprint from the scene of crime, from the surface, from the play on the wall, from the porous surface, from a glass surface, right? Right? Not like that. See, lifting the finger, I'm not going to discuss about what are the different technique that you have to do, what are the different powders that you need to apply, what are the different chemical that you need to apply for lifting the fingerprint from the scene of crime, from the surface, right? That is not the job of a medical officer. The job of, right, it is a job of fingerprint expert from the forensic science area. Forensic science people will be doing all this development of the fingerprint, lifting the fingerprint from the scene of crime. So it is not relevant to us. What is more relevant for us is lifting the fingerprint from the living people, living person, right, and the dead bodies. We're going to discuss about that. In a living person, there are two techniques of lifting the fingerprint. Number one, plain. Another one is rolling. The name itself tells you what it is. Plain and rolling. Plain means you just keep it on the surface. That is plain. Rolling means you start from one edge, roll the finger up to the opposite edge to edge. So that is rolling. Fine? Right. The dead bodies. In a dead bodies, in case if the skin is shrunk, if it is so dry, if it is mummified, if it is shriveled, right? If it is shriveled or if it is mummified, what you can do is you can inject liquid paraffin. You can inject liquid paraffin, or you can also inject glycerin so that it will become normal. Then you can take the fingerprint from that finger. Or else you can also take the skin, preserve it in formalin. Preserve that skin in formalin. If it is completely decomposed bodies, advanced decomposed bodies, your job is very simple, because in advanced decomposed bodies, the entire palm skin will be peeling off like a glove. You can take that glove and keep it in the formalin and preserve it. It will be easy, right? It is so easy for you to preserve that skin in case of decomposed bodies. Fine. So these are the two important process by which you can preserve the fingerprint that you need to remember. Now going forward, suppose if you have two fingerprint, right? So this is the fingerprint. This is the fingerprint taken from the accused, suspect. The second one is a fingerprint that is taken from the scene of crime. How would you know the fingerprint taken from the scene of crime belongs to the suspect or not? How will you match it? How are you going to compare and match? Let's talk about that. Matching the fingerprint. Matching the fingerprint. We'll talk about that. Matching the fingerprint. Right. Right. As soon as we say that we are matching the fingerprint, the first thing that comes to our mind is the pattern. Whether it is loop, whether it is arch, whether it is pulse. But do remember, looking at the pattern itself will not give you any information, because you know very well the pattern is not unique to each person. You know very well the loop is common, most common. It is 65% of the whole population will be having only loop. Does it mean that it belongs to the suspect? No. Right? No. Right? It is not unique. You cannot just find out the person, match the fingerprint by looking at the pattern itself. That is wrong. What you can do is you need to look at the rich character. You need to look at the rich character. When you look at the rich character, which is also called as minutiae. Minutiae. What is this basically? Right? What is this basically? This minutiae is basically you need to follow each ridge. Right? Let us say this is a ridge. Right? Let us say this is the ridge. Right? You follow this ridge, you follow the ridge. Each ridge will be showing different characters. Right? Each ridge will be showing different characters. The ridge will go there, it can bifurcate. It can bifurcate. Or the ridge, this is bifurcation. Bifurcation. Or the ridge will show some lake formation like this. Or the ridge will go there, it completely terminate abruptly. Abruptly it will terminate. Or the ridge will show bridging formation, two ridges, it will show bridging formation. Likewise, there are n number of ridge characters that can be observed in the ridges. Right? You can see that. You can see that. You can see termination, you can see bifurcation, you can see termination, you can see bifurcation, you can see lake formation, you can see point, you can see spur, and you can see crossover or bridge formation. I told you n number of ridge characters can be identified like this. Likewise, what you have to do is, suppose if you are comparing, this is the fingerprint taken from the suspect and that is a fingerprint taken from the scene of crime. What you have to notice is, let us follow this one, right? You can see the ridge, follow the ridge. Let us say what ridge we can say. We can take this ridge, right? It stops abruptly and you can see the ridge is merging each other. You can similarly, you can take the ridge on this side, you can see this is merging, two ridges merging. Match point 1, point 1. Likewise, again you see the same ridge here, it is bifurcating, right? Point number 2. Likewise, you need to match at least 12 points of comparison. 12 to 16 points of comparison has to be made. Then only you can say this fingerprint belongs to that person, right? This fingerprint belongs to that person. 12 to 16 points of, see, actually the points, it vary from place to place, country to country, state to state. But what is taken from the textbook is 12 to 16 points of comparison has to be taken to compare whether the fingerprint belongs to the suspect or accused or not. Fingerprint taken from the scene of crime belongs to the accused or suspect or not. That is what you need to remember. That is called ridge character or minutiae. This study is called as regioscopy. This study is called as regioscopy. Right? First we discussed about pattern, then I told you ridge character. This study is called as regioscopy. As I told you, you need to have 12 to 16 points of comparison has to be made. Basically, as I told you, that is variable from place to place. Right? The third important point is, right, the next level of identification is you need to see the edge of the ridge. Character of the edge. Right? Because if you look at the ridge edges, that will show typical features. The study of which is called as edgioscopy. The study of which is called as edgioscopy, right? That is next level of identification, right? Or suppose in case you get only partial fingerprint, you don't get a complete fingerprint, you get only a partial fingerprint. In that case, you can use one more important study that is called as poroscopy, right? Poroscopy. What is that poroscopy? This is basically the study of sweat glands. Sweat pores in between two fingerprint ridges, right? In between two fingerprint ridges, right? Sweat pores. It is not sebaceous. We don't have sebaceous gland on the palm. It is sweat glands only. That itself is an MCQ which was asked earlier, right? When you look at this, you can see this. These are the pores that you can see. You can note one more important thing. Look at the edge of the ridges. The edge of the ridges will be showing this kind of feature that is so unique. That's why I told you that is edgioscopy, right? Then the next thing is you need to look at the pores in between the ridges. You can see the pore, something like this. You can see in each you are able to see 9 to 18 pores. 9 to 18 pores will be there. That pores will vary on the size, shape, the orientation, right? The opening, everything will be unique to each person. It will be unique to each person by which you can identify the person. This is called poroscopy. Do remember, this was given by a person called Edmund Locard. Right? This was invented by a person called Edmund Locard. Do remember Locard. You also need to remember there is one more principle given by the same Locard, Locard's principle of exchange. What is a Locard principle of exchange? Whenever there is contact between two surfaces, there is an exchange of metal between two surfaces. The same Locard has given this study. This is called poroscopy. Right? This is called poroscopy. Do remember, I've told you first, I told you about pattern, not possible. Then I told you ridge character, we call it as regioscopy. Then I told you edges, that is edgeoscopy. The last level, that is poroscopy. Between the two fingerprint ridges, so we are able to see the pore, that is basically sweat pore. Sweat pore, do remember that is sweat pore. Okay, because that was an important MCQ for you. So having learnt about the fingerprint, you should know why fingerprint is so important, so unique, right? Number one, the fingerprint is not inherited. The parents and the kids will not have same fingerprint. Okay, both will be different, even though, right, parents and kids. And do remember, this fingerprint will be different. Fingerprint will be different even in monozygotic twins. So that is so important. And that is the reason why dactylography is superior to DNA fingerprinting, because in monozygotic twins, the DNA pattern will be the same. For monozygotic twins, to differentiate the monozygotic twins, this dactylography will be the best, right? So that is why this is superior than DNA fingerprinting, dactylography. And usually this is permanent. It doesn't change. Once it is formed, it doesn't change. That is permanent. Fine. Right? So these are the three important points that you need to remember. And I told you it is permanent, but there are some conditions where you can say alteration of the fingerprint. We'll be learning on that. You can see there sometimes there can be a complete absence. Sometimes there can be a complete absence. We call that's a congenital condition. We call it as adermatoglyphia. No fingerprints at all. That this person will not be able to use any biometry using fingerprint. Okay, adermatoglyphia. Sometimes there can be atrophy of the fingerprint. There can be a complete atrophy. There can also be a partial atrophy. Complete atrophy is seen with celiac disease. You can remember C for C. You can remember C for C, that is celiac disease. Partial atrophy, that is seen with dermatitis. That can be seen with dermatitis. The dermatitis. Okay. And then you have another condition, there can be increased space between two fingerprint ridges. Between the two ridges, the space will keep on increasing. What is that? You can see that in acromegaly. You can also see that in infantile paralysis. Acromegaly, infantile paralysis, and rickets. How can you remember? You can remember the mnemonic AIR. AIR. Acromegaly, infantile paralysis, and rickets. Right? Sometimes the pattern itself will be totally impaired. Conditions like leprosy, electrocution, radiation, charring, these are the places where there can be a permanent impairment of the fingerprint. Right? This is very, very important. Right? You need to know this. It was asked in one of your previous INA-CT question. This is very tough question, but do remember this is an extra edge topic. But what you have to remember very commonly is what are the conditions where you can see permanent impairment of the pattern. Three important conditions: leprosy, electrocution, radiation, charring. Okay, remember that. Okay, fine. This is important with regard to fingerprinting. Now we'll be moving on to another important technique. This technique is a study of lip printing. This study is called as cheloscopy. This study is called a cheloscopy, wherein it is a study of lip printing. Right? You need to lift the lip print from any surface like a glass, if the person was drinking something from a glass, or if the person was using cigarette, from the cigarette butt, you can take the lip print, all these places from where you can lift the lip printing. Any fruit or something the person has eaten. Okay. Now coming to the classification. Suzuki classification is a classification very useful for lip printing. Suzuki classification, right? Suzuki and Sushi, just know it is Suzuki classification, that is sufficient. There are 6 patterns are there. Type 1, you will have a vertical groove like that. Okay. And type 2, it is partial vertical. The length will be little smaller. Vertical only, but it is partial. It doesn't go for the entire stretch. Okay. Branched groove is something where you can see it is branched like this. Fine. And then intersected grooves means you will have intersection. Right? There's a difference between branching and intersection. And reticular groove will you will have a network something. This is reticular. Right? And last one is undifferentiated. Right? There is no particular pattern. It is undifferentiated. You can see that is vertical groove, partial groove. You have branching. intersected, and reticular groove. Totally, you will have 6 types based on Suzuki classification. Do remember, this is called cheloscopy. Where will you take the lip print? Don't tell it is lip. Okay, right? When we say where will you lift the fingerprint, you need to tell me the surface where it is being lifted. Okay, so that is very important. Fine. Okay, moving further, let's talk about the next technique. The next technique is rugoscopy. What we are looking at is the cast of the palate, wherein you can see the rugae. Right, you can see the rugae. Fine, very important. Now you see, this study is called as rugoscopy. Rugoscopy, also called as palatoscopy. Palatoscopy, because it is taken from the hard palate, it is also called as palatoscopy. What are we studying here? Here we are studying the arrangement of rugae, studying the pattern of rugae. Which part of the palate? Hard palate or soft palate? Hard palate or soft palate, guys? It is hard palate. Right? Anterior 1/3 of the palate. Anterior 1/3 of the palate. If they ask you whether it is seen in the hard palate or soft palate, if you don't know that, no problem. In the examination, using your tongue, feel the palate, you will be able to find out where is the location of rugae, and you can easily answer the question. That was one of your questions which was asked earlier. Which part of the palate that you can see the rugae? So basically it is rugoscopy. What you have to see is, there are 3 basic types of rugae. Number 1, it is primary rugae. Right? Based on the length, you can classify. We have primary rugae, we have secondary rugae, we also have tertiary rugae. Primary rugae is there, secondary rugae is there, tertiary rugae is also there. Primary rugae is somewhere between 5 to 10 millimeter. The length 5 to 10 millimeter. 3 to 5 millimeter, that is secondary rugae. Less than 3 millimeter, that is tertiary rugae. Right? While we are comparing, you need to compare all the primary, secondary, tertiary. All the 3 rugae have to be compared, and you can identify the person. So this study is so important. Right? Basically, this will be very useful in case of mutilated bodies, particularly in case of burns and all. This study will be very useful, because all these things will be preserved. Right? It will be very preserved because it is inside the oral cavity. It will not be disturbed, it will not be destroyed, because it is inside the oral cavity. Fine. In case of burns and all, this will be very, very useful. Rugoscopy, also called as palatoscopy. You can look at the rugal arrangement. Right. The next technique that we have to learn is the next study of complete identification or definitive identification is tattoo marks. We'll learn about tattoo marks. What are basically tattoo marks? Tattoo marks are basically the design which you are producing. Designs produced. How are you producing the design? Designs produced by injecting. You are injecting either pigment or dye into the skin. Basically, which part of the skin that you inject, that is important? Dermis. Ideally, it has to be injected into the dermis. If the dye is injected superficially, right, maybe in the epidermis and all, it will be fading away very easily. If it's injected too deeper below the dermis, it will be taken up by the phagocytes. Again, it will be fading away. Ideally, it has to be in the dermis. Fine. Now, you can see this. This is the skin. Right? This is epidermis, this is dermis. Ideally, it has to be injected in the dermis region. And what happens when the dye is injected into the skin? This dye is also taken up by the local lymph nodes. Right? Local lymph nodes. You can see the presence of this pigment in the regional lymph node as well. That is very, very important point to be remembered. This is regional lymph node. So sometimes if you are not able to find out the tattoo mark, right? If the tattoo mark is too faint, if you are not able to find out, look at the regional lymph node. In the regional lymph node, you can examine the regional lymph node. In the regional lymph node, you'll be able to find the pigment, right? Let me tell you what are the different ways by which you can find out the faded tattoo mark. If the tattoo mark is faded, how to find out the tattoo marks? what you can do is you can use magnifying glass. You can use magnifying glass, magnifying lens, or what you can do is you can also use infrared photography. You can also use infrared photography, or you can use UV lights. Finally, if nothing is going to be working out, what you can do is the last one, what you can use is examination of regional lymph nodes. Regional lymph node, RLN, that means regional lymph node. You need to examine the regional lymph node. You'll be able to see the presence of pigment from inside. What are the information that you can get from the tattoo marks? One, sometimes from the place, depending on the pigment that is used, you can find out the place, region. You can find out the religion. Okay, they might be tattooing something related to the religion, right? You can also find out the name of the person, mostly the name. They used to tattoo their name, or they will tattoo the name of the beloved person, right? Wife, girlfriend. Sometimes people, they tattoo the name of the girlfriends also. Okay, I have seen people tattooing the face of the girlfriend, okay, in the chest. I've seen that. Then we have, you can also find out the political interest of the person, right? Sometimes what happens, this IV drug abusers will be having lot of multiple tattooing. The reason is, when IV drug abusers, when they keep on using the vein for injecting the drug, there will be lot of scarring over that area. To conceal that scarring, these people will have tattooing on that particular limb. Okay, so IV drug abusers will also have multiple tattooing to cover that, to conceal that scar marks. Right? So all these things that you can see based on the tattoo marks, you can have a look at it. So this is basically the injection of the pigment or the dye into the skin. Right? You can see tattoo marks. You have multiple designs produced by this tattoo mark. Now we'll be discussing on one more important technique, that is called superimposition. Superimposition. It is superimposing one over the other, right? This technique is specifically used when you have a missing person from an area, and after a few weeks or few months, like you have recovered the bones from that particular area, you want to know whether the bones belong to the missing person or not, whether the skull belongs to the missing person or not. For that particular thing, we can use this particular technique, that is called superimposition, right? Superimposition. For that, what you basically need to have is, you need the photograph of the person, anti-mortem photograph of the person, and the photograph of the skull. We need to superimpose one over the other, right? So here, this technique is basically to find out, to match whether the skull belongs to the missing person or not. Belongs to the missing person or not. What do you need? You need the photograph of the missing person. That's all. Right? If you are able to get the photograph, right, we can do what is called as photo superimposition. Right? We also have one more technique, that is video superimposition. So both the techniques are there. Photo superimposition and video to superimposition, both techniques are there. Let me tell you an example. You can see this is the missing person, for assuming that this is the photograph of the missing person. And after a few weeks, like you get the photograph of the skull. You got the skull from that area, you took a photograph. What we basically have to do is, right, you can see the photograph is superimposed on the skull. Right? Then you can see this is a superimposed image, wherein what you have to do is, you need to look for the bony landmarks. You need to look for the bony landmarks of the skull, right, and the photograph, right, whether exactly the bony landmarks are matching or not, right? If the bony landmark, just like your inner canthus, outer canthus, the nasion, right, in all these areas, you just need to see whether these particular landmarks are exactly matching or not. When this is exactly matching, when the bony landmarks are exactly matching, that means the skull may belong to the person, right? If the bony landmarks are not at all matching, you can easily say the skull does not belong to the person, right? Hope you understood my words. Do remember, right? If the landmarks are exactly matching, that means the skull may belong to the person, right? If the bony landmarks are not at all matching, you can definitely say the skull does not belong to the person. This is more of a negative value. This test, this technique, superimposition techniques, carries more of negative value. This is a technique of test of exclusion. You can exclude whether the skull, right, it's belonging to the person or not, right? Whether you can, if this skull belongs to the missing person or not, that you can find out from this superimposition technique, right? What you have to see is, in the superimposed image, you just need to look at the bony landmarks. Okay, so this is superimposition technique. I told you it has got both video and photograph, right? So video superimposition, photographic superimposition, both techniques are there, right? The next important area that we have to discuss is medico-legal importance of age, right? Let us look at, we have discussed about age determination, right? From dentition, from ossification, right? By so many other parameters. But what is the medico-legal importance? We'll be now discussing on the medico-legal importance of age. We'll be discussing about the medico-legal importance of various ages. To start with, let us start with intrauterine life, right? Suppose, let us say 4 months. 4th month of intrauterine life. This is when the sex can be recognized. Sex of the fetus can be recognized. Sex of the fetus can be recognized. Okay. If the gestation age is about 20th week of intrauterine life, right? For MTP, for termination of pregnancy, one doctor opinion is sufficient. One doctor opinion is needed. Right? One doctor is sufficient for MTP, for medical termination of pregnancy, right? As per the latest Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act 2021, right? Then you have, if the gestation age is 24 weeks of gestation, if it is between 20 to 24, you need opinion of 2 doctors. 2 doctors opinion is needed for conducting MTP. Right? MTP. If it is more than 24 weeks, you need the approval from the medical board for conducting MTP. Right? Let us say 28 weeks of gestation, that is a period of viability. Period of viability. Viability is the ability of the fetus to lead a separate existence apart from its mother by virtue of its development. That means the fetus should have been adequately developed enough so that it can lead a separate existence outside the mother. That occurs by the viability period, that is 28 weeks of gestation. So far we were talking about the intrauterine life, gestational age, intrauterine life. Let us say baby is born. Okay, right? If the baby is less than 1 year, you can call the baby as infant, and killing of a baby, killing of an infant, that is called infanticide. Killing of infant is called infanticide, right? Under what section that is punishable? Infanticide. Do remember, in Indian law, there is no differentiation between killing of an adult and killing of a child. Both are same, dealt in the same way. So, infanticide is also punishable under 302 IPC. This is also punishable under 302 IPC. Okay. Now, going forward, let's talk about criminal responsibility, right? If the age of the child is less than 7 years, if the age of the child is less than 7 years, do remember, the child committing a crime, child is less than 7 years, committing a crime, the child is not liable to be punished. There is no criminal responsibility for a child less than 7 years. Do remember, this is given by 82 IPC. Right? Do remember, friends, make a note of it. This is 82 IPC. Nothing is an offense committed by a child less than 7 years of age. Okay. Then if the child is between 7 to 12 years, if the child is between 7 to 12 years, the criminal responsibility here, it depends on the mental maturity of the child. It depends on the mental maturity of the child, that is determined by the presiding officer of the court, that is judge. Okay, and this is given by the section 83 IPC. Right? Make a note of this, guys. Make a note of this section, guys. This is 83 IPC. When I told you 7 less than 7 years, that is 82 IPC. 7 to 12 years, it is 83 IPC. What is the medical legal importance of age 10? Let's talk about age 10. Right? Taking away a child from legal guardian for stealing movable property. It amounts to kidnapping. Movable property that amounts to kidnapping, and that is punishable. It amounts to kidnapping and that is punishable under 369 IPC. 369 IPC. All this is punishment, so it has to be under IPC, Indian Penal Code. A school kid is there wearing valuable ornament, gold ornament. One person is showing a candy or ice cream, just taking the child away, right? And that is for the purpose of stealing that valuable asset. Okay, so all this is punishable. It amounts to kidnapping. All that is punishable under 369 IPC. Okay, what is the medical legal importance of age 12? Age 12, right? You can see a child less than 12 years, right, in the court of law while recording evidence, right? Child less than 12 years, no need to take oath. No need to take oath. But you also need to remember, guys, you need to be very clear on that. A child of any age can give evidence in the court of law, but a child less than 12 years need not take oath, right? Need not take oath because the child doesn't understand the nature or obligation of oath. Okay, so need not take oath. Suppose if a consent, if it is for physical examination, right? If it is just for physical examination, nothing more than that, the minimum age is 12 years. The minimum age is 12 years. Okay, just physical examination, no other major procedures. In case, right, if the child is less than 12 years, right, the consent always has to be given by the guardian. Consent should be given by the guardian, right? And this is given by the section 89 IPC, right? In the same way, for a child less than 12 years, guardian has to give consent. What if child has given consent? If the child are less than 12 years given consent, and the consent will be invalid, right? Consent given by a child less than 12 years, consent by a child less than 12 years is invalid. It is invalid. And this is given by the section 90 IPC. 90 IPC also states under what are the other situations where the consent can be invalid. Insanity, influence, intoxication. But child less than 12 years also mentioned in that. If the child is less than 12 years, guardian has to give consent. That is given by 89 IPC. A child less than 12 years, if it is given consent, the consent is invalid. That is given by 90 IPC. Okay, so this is about 12 years. Now moving on to 14 years. Let's talk about 14. Right? A person less than 14 years cannot be employed in any kind of occupation, any kind of factory or any kind of occupation. A child less than 14 years cannot be employed. Okay, 16 years. 16. Right? 16 years. Taking away a boy of 16 years, right, from guardian, lawful guardianship, right, it amounts to kidnapping. Right? 361 IPC, which is punishment is given by 363 IPC. Right? Kidnapping definition is 361 and the punishment is given by 360. That is not so important. But what you have to remember is taking away a boy less than 16 years from legal guardianship, it amounts to kidnapping. Similarly, this is for a boy 16 years. If it is for female, girl, it is 18 years. Taking away a girl of 18 years, less than 18 years from legal guardianship, that is also amounting to kidnapping. Okay, for a boy it is 16 years, for a girl it is 18 years. Okay, let's talk about the age of 18. Right, it has got lot of medico legal importance. 18 years, we'll discuss about that. Okay, for that what I can give you is, I can give you a mnemonic of adolescent. Right, you can remember with this very easily. Adolescent. Fine. Okay, so 18 years. So remember adolescent. You can remember all the other points related to that. It's quite very simple to remember. Let's talk about A. A for attainment of majority. A person has become major and the person has attained 18 years of age. Attainment of majority. And it is also the age of marriage for female. For female, it is the age of marriage. Age of marriage. Then DO. What is the DO? Donation of organs. Right? A person of 18 years can donate organ. Donation of organs. Can be an organ donor. Okay. Then the next letter is L. L for license. You can get a driving license once you have become 18 years old. Okay. E for election. Voting. You are eligible for voting in the election. You are eligible for voting in the election. So that is your E. Yes. Right? Sexual intercourse. Consent for sexual intercourse. The minimum age is 18. Minimum age is 18. Right? Consent for any major procedures like surgery, right? Surgery, MTP, right? All other procedures, major procedures, the minimum age is 18. Minimum age is 18. Then you've got E for employment. The person can get employed in any kind of occupation. N for Naukri. Again, you can think of employment, job. The person can, both are same, right? E and N, right? Both the person can get employed. The person can also get employed in a government service. All this is 18 years. And T for testamentary capacity. Testamentary capacity. What do you mean by that? The person has got, right, the capacity to make a valid will. The person of 18 years can write a valid will, right? Right. So these are all the medico legal importance of age 18. Fine. You can remember it is majority, age of marriage, organ donation, license, election, voting. You can say sexual intercourse, consent for any other major procedures, employment, and testamentary capacity. Okay. So these are all the medico legal importance of age 18. Let's talk about 21. Right. 21 years. I told you 21 years. If the person is normal person, right, the person can become a major at the age of 18. Suppose if the person is under courtship, right, if the person is under the courtship of law, then the person can become a major at the age of 21. And this is the age of marriage. Age of marriage, right, for boys. For girls, it is 18. For boys, it is 21. Now, the government of India is planning to enhance these girl age from 18 to 21. But for now, it is girls, it is 18. Boys, it is 21. Right? And procuring female procuring a female from abroad for prostitution is punishable, right? Okay, so these are all the medico legal importance of various ages that is relevant for examination purposes. Okay, fine, right.